Before you throw away your factory levers and your handlebar and you start throwing risers on your bike, take a few moments, grab your tool roll, and just set the bike up with what the factory gave you to customize and make those ergonomics right. Setting up the ergonomics for adventure bike, what I'm really talking about here is setting up your bike for riding off-road, primarily standing. When you pick your bike up from the factory, they set them up for touring on the street or sitting, and there's nothing wrong with that unless you plan on standing up off-road. To start off with, on the brake, generally there's very little adjustment you can do to this unless we get into changing some of the throw. Let's not mess around with that. Either for a lot of bikes, what they'll have on like the Rally Pro here, the Triumph, all they do is they have it where you can twist that foot peg or that toe and it'll rise it up just slightly. And different manufacturers do this in different ways. As far as the foot pegs go, you don't want to be on rubber. And I don't care if it crushes or not. Yamaha and some of the Hondas, they say that it crushes down so you can get to the cleats. On the Triumph Rally Pro here, the 2022, they just have some resistance on the rubber so you can reach in, pull it out, shove it in your pocket, stand on the cleats, and then you're good to go. Others, you may have to pull it from underneath, but definitely pull the rubber out so you're metal. Before you replace the foot pegs and get really large foot pegs, the way to get around that is wear proper footwear. When you wear an adventure boot or anything that says adventure on it, generally means it's a really heavy duty touring boot, but not really good for off-road. They're stiffer than a regular road boot, but they also still have a lot of flex in them. And when you stand on that foot peg, that flex turns into fatigue over time. The way to combat that and continue working with the factory foot peg is switch out and use an actual proper off-road boot. And something like the Alpenstar Tech 10s, these boots are going to be very stiff, and the steel shank or the metal shank or the fiber shank in the bottom of this is going to provide that support without having a larger foot peg on it. That's a way to get around changing these parts. On the left side of the bike, we just need to get this shifter dialed in. What I do is use a tire iron to measure where to baseline the shifter. From the factory, it's almost always from the top of the peg to the top of the shifter. But because of the thick off-road boots and because we're standing, we need to raise the toe up to just about the bottom so it rests on top of the tire iron instead of underneath it. The adjustable shift rod here, this is pretty typical for most motorcycles. And what you'll find is one of them is a correct direction in the thread, so it's a righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. The other one is the opposite. And that's because once you spin that rod, and you'll see this in here in just a second, if I were to take my tire iron and spin this rod, you'll see it rises up. Then I set my shifter just about on top of where that tire iron would go, and then I just tighten up those two jam nuts. Done. The Triumph is the flattest handlebar I know. Even looking at KTM, which has a very heavy dirt bias, you'll see that there's a lot more sweep on the handlebars pulling it back towards the rider. That leverage on the Tiger and that flat pull makes it really ideal when you get off-road. The adjustment on the handlebars is very simple. There's a clamp up here on the handlebars and there's two bolts. Most of the time you can rotate them just by loosening one bolt. Sometimes you'll have to adjust all of them or loosen all four of them. When you loosen those up, all you're trying to do is rotate the handlebars just very slightly. Very small adjustments make huge differences when you ride. This one, the factory adjustment on this bar, and most of the manufacturers have some sort of dot or a little plus on the handlebars that will show you where they're supposed to be set by the dealer. On the Triumph Tiger on the 900, it's a little plus or a little cross. And all I do is I rotate it until the top of that little plus is right at the crack or the seam where those clamps are. And that's just about perfect for most riders. Once you slide it into that position, make sure you tighten everything back up. The way I baseline the motorcycles is by standing beside the motorcycle. I look at the tips of the handlebars and I make sure that the tips and the inside edge of the handlebars draw a straight line all the way across. If these outer points here look a little bit low and the handlebars bow down, which is what makes it so comfortable on the street, then the handlebars can rotate farther forward. If you rotate the bars so high that those tips come up, you end up making a V. And then when you're standing, your arms are twisted and your wrists are twisted in the wrong direction. To baseline it, I try to run that flat all the way across. And if that doesn't solve the problem, then I start looking at new handlebars or other solutions. Once I rock the handlebars forward, then I want to correct the angle of the levers. And you always do the handlebars first, because just by rocking them forward, a lot of times the levers will just rock into the ideal position. To adjust the levers, there's a clamp on the back behind the mirror. Just grab your Allen, loosen it up, the handles will move into position, and then tighten them back up. Once it's tight, then go ahead and check your position. Now when I'm sitting on the motorcycle, what I should feel is that my hand is slightly rolled over onto the brake, but that I'm not overreaching too far. And this means when I stand up, I also want my wrist to be in a down position, but not too high. In fact, this is still just a little bit high for me. So I'm gonna loosen it up again, twist it down just a little bit more. There we go. I think that'll be about right. Want to be comfortable for the street, not necessarily perfect, but comfortable. And then when I stand up, same thing. I want to be comfortable, but it may not be absolutely ideal. On the clutch side, do the same thing. Just loosen up the pinch bolt, rock it into position. On the right-hand side, I usually start by adjusting the throttle. And what I want to do is take out all of the free play possible so that when I'm riding, I'm not running through a bunch of cable throw before I disengage or engage power. The electronics on the Triumph and most of your modern bikes allow you no adjustment. If you have an older bike, or if you're riding a KLR or a DRZ or some of those other bikes, they still have a cable on them. You'll just have to adjust the free play out of that cable. I can't really show you on this bike because it's electronic. The brake is the same thing. I want the brake adjusted as near the engagement point as possible. That means I want it up on my fingertips. I don't want it all the way up near my hand. And if it's really close and I'm pinching fingers, that's a problem. And also I'm going through a lot of throw before I get engagement. The adjustments on these are pretty easy. Push the lever away from you, make the adjustment on the factory lever, and then make sure it's out on your fingertips. And this is where you're going to have the most precision and control. On the clutch, you want to adjust it near the closest point of engagement. That means disengaged to when you start to ease the clutch out to the engagement point. And the only way to know where that engagement is to start the motorcycle up and put it in gear. Now this bike, I'm not able to start it with only 2 fingers in because it has a safety switch, so I have to pull 4 fingers in. And then I can switch to 2, and I can start to ease into the power. You see how far that clutch moves before it starts to engage. So right here, I want to have just right next to my fingers. So I'm going to shut it down, and this one has a dial knob on it. So the Triumph 900 Rally Pro. So I'm going to go from a 1 to a 4. It only has 4 adjustments on this particular bike. Get started up, go to 2 fingers, and then ease it out. And you can see it really didn't change it that much, not enough. Now the nice thing about the Triumph is it also has a cable adjustment. On the Triumph, you have a jam nut, and you just relax that jam nut, and then you can move this adjuster here. And as I move it in, I create more slack in the cable. That slack is allowing the lever to get closer to the handlebar. Once I set my adjustment, slide the jam nut back into place, tighten that up. That way it doesn't loosen up while I'm riding the motorcycle. Once I've adjusted the cable, I'm going to check it again. See, much better. So I'm looking for 10 to 15 millimeters. I'll go ahead and just make a little more of an adjustment. And that's perfect. The closer it is to your hand, the less fatigue it is to control and to hold that clutch in. And when you're closer to the hand, it's much easier to move into that friction zone and be precise about your controls. When it's way out on your fingertips, there's just too much swing to be precise. Ergonomics are one of those aspects of adventure riding that is really underrated by a lot of riders and a lot of trainers. If the bike doesn't fit you right, it can really mess with how confident you are, how comfortable you are, and how much fatigue you have when you ride a motorcycle. And if you're well over 6 foot, if you're 6'5" or 6'6", it may be very difficult to get a bike to fit right. You're going to start changing parts and lowering foot pegs and changing the handlebars on the bike to try to get it right. But for those of us that are 6 foot or below, you can get a bike dialed in pretty well using just the factory adjustments. Make sure that you take a few moments, get your bike set up, and then make sure you have the right skill sets and the right riding techniques to reduce that fatigue, to keep you safe, to maximize the fun that you have while you're out there riding. If you haven't already, hit like and subscribe. Make sure you do that. Leave a comment below, share it with a friend. If you want to travel with me out of the country, if you want to train with me, check out bretttkacs.com. Thanks for watching the channel, and I'll see you guys next time.